PvE modes are some of the most hated game modes inside of Brawl Stars, and there are a ton of reasons why, and today we'll be going over all of them along with some possible ways to fix PvE inside of Brawl Stars to make it something actually viable and something that people would want to play. So let's just get right into it. Brawl Stars has had many different game modes, with some of them including Robo Rumble, Boss Fight, and Last Stand. These modes allow players to team up and battle against AI controlled enemies, which is what makes them PvE, as they are fighting robots instead of actual players. However, the community has raised several concerns about these modes. Firstly, there is a significant lack of replayability. Once you have beaten a certain difficulty level, there is very little incentive for you to continue playing. The modes just become repetitive, leading to boredom. Secondly, it is really hard to scale up, which is bad for the people that actually even enjoy these modes. Players with lower level brawlers often find it challenging to compete, as the modes can be too difficult without the high level brawlers, and oftentimes people just resort to using some sort of glitch or bug or something in order to win, and that just takes away from the whole point of the game. Lastly, the supercharge rate is drastically reduced in PvE modes. Supers are a core part of what makes each brawler unique and fun to play. Reducing their effectiveness by 70% can make the different game modes less enjoyable, especially for brawlers who rely heavily on their supers. So these are really like 3 big reasons as for why PvE modes suck, but I really do want to just talk more about the lack of replayability, since that is a massive factor in all of this. Replayability is crucial for keeping players engaged over the long term. Unfortunately, the current PvE modes in Brawl Stars suffer from this repetitive gameplay. Once you have learned the patterns and behaviors of the robots, the challenge really just goes away and the experience becomes boring. For example, in Boss Fight, players face the same boss with predictable attack patterns. You know what its next attacks are going to be, and it just becomes less fun the more times you play the mode. Similarly, in Robo Rumble, the waves of robots follow a specific pattern, and that makes it easy for you to just predict and deal with them. This lack of variation makes the experience stale, and it discourages players from returning to these modes. The community has suggested several improvements to address this issue, with the first one being to add more robots. Introducing new enemy types that require different strategies to defeat could add the much needed variety. Plus, it could be made so that you get different sets of robots every game, which means they aren't the same every game. Additionally, incorporating dynamic enemy behaviors could keep players on their toes. Instead of following predictable patterns, AI enemies could adapt to players' strategies, making each encounter more engaging. This approach has been successful in other games and could significantly enhance the replayability of PvE modes in Brawl Stars, since right now it is really basic when compared to other games. But now let's move on to the next problem. Difficulty scaling is another critical issue in Brawl Stars PvE modes, and players with lower level brawlers often struggle to compete as the modes can be too difficult without maxed out brawlers. This disparity creates a barrier for new and casual players, preventing them from fully enjoying the game without having the right brawlers at the right levels. For example, in Robo Rumble, the difficulty increases significantly at higher levels, making it nearly impossible for players with lower level brawlers to succeed. This issue is compounded by the fact that many PvE modes require a coordinated team effort, meaning that one underleveled player can jeopardize the entire team's success. Plus, you also just have to rely on randoms, and that rarely ever works well for PvE modes if you are trying to win at the really high difficulty levels. This is just another issue of bad randoms, and it is arguably even worse in PvE than PvP. The community has proposed several solutions to address this problem. One suggestion is the implementation of an easy mode that is winnable with level 7 brawlers. This mode would provide a more accessible entry point for new and casual players, allowing them to enjoy PvE content without feeling overwhelmed. Another suggestion is to introduce a more gradual difficulty curve. Instead of sudden jumps in difficulty, the game could increase the challenge incrementally, giving players a chance to adapt and improve their skills. This approach would make PvE modes more inclusive and enjoyable for players of all levels, and they could add in a hard mode for the people who really want a challenge, kind of similar to how it is in Clash of Clans. But now let's move on to the third big issue with PvE. The Supercharge Reduction in PvE modes is a significant issue that negatively impacts gameplay. Supers are a core part of what makes each brawler unique and fun to play. Reducing their effectiveness by 70% can make the game mode less enjoyable, especially for brawlers who rely heavily on their supers. For example, brawlers like Spike and Crow have supers that are crucial to their playstyle. With the supercharge rate drastically reduced, these brawlers become less viable in PvE modes, limiting the diversity of strategies and brawlers that players can use effectively. This change has led to a meta where mainly high DPS brawlers are viable, further reducing the variety of gameplay. It's either that or some other brawler with some ability that can be used to cheese the game mode, and that obviously isn't how it is supposed to be. The community has provided feedback on this issue, suggesting that the supercharge rates be balanced to make all brawlers viable in PvE modes. One potential solution is to adjust the supercharge rate based on the brawler's role and playstyle. For example, support brawlers could have a higher supercharge rate to compensate for their lower damage output, making them more effective in PvE scenarios. So now that we have gone over a lot of the main problems with PvE, we need to see exactly how Brawl Stars can make it better. To understand how Brawl Stars can improve its PvE modes, it's helpful to look at successful implementations in other games. For example, Splatoon 2's Salmon Run and Team Fortress 2's Man vs. Machine are both pretty well liked PvE modes inside of PvP games. In Salmon Run, players face waves of enemies with varying abilities and attack patterns. The dynamic nature of the enemies keeps the gameplay fresh and challenging. Additionally, the mode includes special events and boss battles that require unique strategies, adding to the replayability. Similarly, Man vs. Machine in Team Fortress 2 features waves of robots with different abilities and roles. The mode encourages teamwork and strategy as players must coordinate their efforts to succeed. The inclusion of different enemy types and dynamic behaviors keeps the gameplay engaging and fun. Brawl Stars can learn from these examples by introducing more varied and dynamic enemy behaviors in its PvE modes. So now that we've looked at PvE modes in other games and seen how Brawl Stars could learn from them, I think we also just need to look at the PvP modes inside of Brawl Stars and what makes them so much better than the PvE modes. PvP modes in Brawl Stars are generally more popular than PvE modes, and there are several reasons for this. PvP stands for player versus player, and that means you're up against someone else and not a robot. This means that you can't just predict exactly what the player is going to do, and instead you have to adapt and respond to the actions of the enemy. This is really what makes PvP so fun because each game is very different as you play against many different people. In contrast, PvE modes can feel static and predictable as players quickly learn the patterns and behaviors of the AI robots. This difference in engagement levels is a significant reason why PvE modes haven't been as successful. To improve PvE modes, Brawl Stars can incorporate elements that make PvP modes so engaging. For example, adding more varied and dynamic enemy behaviors can create a harder and less predictable game. This will just be a great way to keep PvE more engaging and will make people want to come back. But another massive factor that we can't ignore is just what the player gets from all of this. In PvE, you don't really get many rewards, and when most of the PvE modes were part of the weekend events, you were only incentivized to play 5 games, since after that, you wouldn't get any more rewards. If you compare this to PvP, then you get rewards out of every game, and you gain trophies, which helps with your overall progression as well, and give more of a sense of achievement. So if Brawl Stars just added more rewards in PvE modes, I think that would be a way to get people to play them more. So overall, the main problem with PvE inside of Brawl Stars is just that it gets too boring too quickly, and there just isn't much of an incentive to actually play the modes. Plus, something that I didn't talk about was just how it can honestly be frustrating in some modes like Last Stand, since 8-bit just walks into the enemies and you can't really even do anything. Plus, the reliance on getting randoms that actually know the strategy can be really hard, as it seems like some people are just dumb or are just trolling. That, along with the fact that you need high-level brawlers, makes these modes less accessible, and it makes sense why we haven't really been seeing them as much. It is an indicator that PvE just failed in the game, and that is why we don't have those weekend events with all the PvE modes anymore. However, there is still some hope that maybe Brawl Stars can fix the modes in the future, since they are honestly pretty fun. However, they just get boring because of how basic they are. But anyways, I really do hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all in the next one.